That was just great. Great way to kick this off and segue into our next guest, which is Steve Wolfe. I'm so excited to welcome him to this week's Conversations for the Future. So Steve Wolfe is a president and co-founder of Beyond Earth Institute. It's a policy think tank dedicated to an independent, nonpartisan approach addressing the pragmatic public policy implications of living and working. He is also for Global Spaceport Alliance and also a partner at CWSP International. He serves as the space and board editors for the Journal of Space Philosophy. Steve served in Washington as the executive director of the Congressional Space Caucus and also drafted the Space Settlement Act of 1988. The bill was signed the NASA Authorization Bill. Steve is the author also of The Obligation, A Journey to Discover Human Purpose and in the cosmos. Steve, we're so happy to have you today and to have you start an exciting conversation.
Yes. Hi. Thank you, Meredith. I hope everyone can see me okay, and I hope you can hear me all right. Everything looks good? Okay. Well, yeah, again, very happy to be here. I think I realized I was here about a year ago talking about this very same topic on the idea of focusing on financing of very large infrastructure elements as well as human habitation. We recognize that that there's a great deal of investment has been going into the space sector, but those amounts have been relatively modest compared to the amount of money that is going to be required for us to really develop the cislunar economy in particular. I mean, LEO itself is going to be hard enough as we transition from the ISS to commercial space stations. But let me share some slides and we'll get right into it. Again, really glad to be here, and thanks Tim Christman for doing this. I really appreciate everything that he's been doing. So I'm going to share my deck now. See if we can get this into, yeah, there we go. Yeah, as Meredith mentioned, I'm with the Beyond Earth Institute. We've been operating for about 3 years now. We were established with a mission to establish and sustain a policy and legal framework that enables economically vibrant communities beyond Earth. It's quite a tall order, but we're trying to find those wedge issues in the near term that can help to that will help to over time expand out and enable this a space migration future. We are focusing on a range of topics. I'll let you scan through these in the interest of time, although, ranging from looking at property rights in space, enabling technologies, setting up norms of behavior, and so forth. But the last bullet is on financing mechanisms. We recognize, as I said, that we're going to need a level of creativity if we're going to be able to finance these very large habitats. And I'll get a little bit more into that. Beyond Earth, we're very active with our webinar series. I just wanted to, just a couple of minutes here. We have a webinar coming up where we're going to be looking at the human, apologize for that, for human safety, human space flight safety. We know that the learning period is coming, the moratorium is coming up for debate, and this is going to be a wonky conversation, but for those of you familiar with that, we'll get in deep with some real experts on the topic on the 24th. Hope you can join us for that. Then I also just would like to announce the Beyond Earth Symposium has a date and a location. We'll be at the American University on November 1st and 2nd. This is our second annual symposium, so you guys could look for information on this and hope you can join us. Very related to what we're talking about today is as the Beyond Earth's Leadership Council that we've stood up. This is really our main method by which we're engaging with the stakeholder community. And And a key element of this council is a series of working groups that we're standing up. And so I just specifically to this topic, we have an advanced financing working group. Currently has these individuals that are participating in that. And you may recognize Andy Aldrin of Embry-Riddle Aeronautics University, and of course Fort Davidson. Some folks that are really instrumental in helping to advance this conversation. If anyone's interested in being part of this, being part of what we're doing at the Beyond Earth Institute, we definitely encourage you to reach out to me. Today we're going to be talking about an ongoing study. This is not something that is, this is an ongoing process whereby the Beyond Earth is looking at advanced financing models. We put out a paper last fall. This is sort of the cover of Advanced Financing Models for Large-Scale Space Infrastructure and Habitats. And this is really, I'll be referencing information contained in this report largely for the rest of the presentation, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for some Q&A. Let's see. But let's level set a little bit. Where are we now? I mean, how are we currently financing commercial space development? Many of us, most of us are familiar with the equity investment that's been going on in the space sector over the last decade. Has been quite exciting up through 2021. And then I think the economic downturn definitely has dampened the appetite for investment in the space sector. But I like to think of this as akin to the ebb and flow of the internet market, say during the dot-com bubble era, during the turn of the century, 2000, 2001, where the space economy is not going away, right? So the investments might be slowed down, but the assets, the capability, the potential is all still very much intact. So we should anticipate that this numbers, as we creep through the rest of the quarters of 2023, we want to see these numbers go up. And so I'm very bullish about this, about the potential for investment. However, that said, when we talk about $2 billion, $5 billion, $10 billion, those are good numbers, but there's also, again, it gets back to this point of, that investment is covering unmanned satellite applications. A little bit sliver maybe is going to manned space flight, but we want to see that significantly increase over time. The other way that space is being funded, of course, is through NASA, the NASA budget. It's at a reasonably healthy level these days. This particular chart is adjusted for inflation. We're not quite at the heyday of the Apollo era, but $25 billion investment a year is a pretty good chunk of money. Of course, a lot of that's going for basic research. Certainly a lot of it's going for manned exploration as we gear up for Artemis and we look ahead to potentially Mars. But much of this financing is going directly from NASA to the contractors to fulfill the various missions of the organization. What I want to hold on, I'm kidding. But what's been interesting in the last 10 years, of course, is that NASA has been looking to leverage the private sector in what it's doing and able to, so that it could achieve its ends. And in 2006, NASA initiated the COTS program. Those of you on the line who are aware of this development has really brought home. I know the COTS program transformed into another name, but essentially it was the idea through this initiative. NASA spent for just $800 million. They got 2 new space launch vehicles and 2 automated cargo spacecraft. So it was a great way to leverage the private sector with federal dollars, and NASA, as it goes forward, is looking to continue to leverage that potential, right, through the CLIPS program, the unmanned lunar lander, the Viper, which is their lunar vehicle program. I understand now they don't want to use the term rover anymore, right? So we want to say it's a lunar vehicle. We're trying to get to a point where space is just an extension of everything we do here on Earth, right? So I thought that was interesting. And of course, the lunar lander program for Artemis is leveraging the commercial partnership. Very interesting. The commercial LEO destination program that was announced over a couple of years ago, is really, this is the program that is whereby the ISS, which is going to be decommissioned by the end of the decade, is going to be transferred over. All that activity is going to be transferred over to private operators of commercial space stations. This is an exciting prospect. But as if for those of you who get Space News magazine, I have an op-ed coming out in this upcoming issue, whereby I argue that the CLD program, the Commercial LEO Destination Program, cannot fail. It is so critical that this particular program, which is being supported by NASA, but NASA is requiring that the private sector put up their own money for this, which is fine. That's absolutely the case. But we don't want to get into a situation where all of a sudden the NASA dollars run out before the private dollars can kind of come in and create a stable LEO economy based upon these private habitats. And so there's a gauntlet that these organizations are going to face, and that's where the tricky bit comes in when you're talking about the public-private partnership activities with NASA. So back to our financing research project. So overall, what basically we're trying to do like a review of all the historical ways of financing and what are those models. We also want to review and evaluate select proposed models for financing of large-scale infrastructure. So let's go. Let me walk you through that. I'm not sure how much time. I'm going to try to go through this pretty quickly at a very high level, but so we can have some time for discussion. You know, I should say a full disclaimer here is I don't have a finance background myself, so I come from the policy side of this. So I'm heavily dependent upon the experts in the finance field. So as the president of the Beyond Earth Institute, this is an issue I know that we have to tackle, but it's going to require so what I'm reporting on is the work of the experts that have helped put this together. But first, what is meant by large-scale infrastructure and habitats in space? Some of the projects, it's not entirely. This is not exclusive by any means, but this list. But certainly, advanced communication satellite capability, laser satellite capability, be able to communicate very efficiently from the lunar surface and ultimately from deeper space, from Mars. Advanced power generation. Can we utilize nuclear power on the moon and in free space? Obviously, solar power continues to be, but we need higher concentrations of power in order to really do anything in space, especially when you're talking about in-space manufacturing, in-space construction, larger and larger scale habitation. The capability to mine water and minerals on the moon, Mars, and asteroids, no small task. And perhaps there'll be a consortium of private entities that'll come together. They've got to close that loop, and government's going to still be a part of that. The ability to efficiently transport resources to desired locations throughout the cislunar environment, so that demand on that transportation on the transportation system is going to increase exponentially over time as activities increase in the cislunar environment and beyond. capabilities for in-space mining operations that will feed in-space mine manufacturing. So linked very closely to that is the notion of in-space manufacturing of goods and services that could, in part, be delivered to U.S. markets. To markets that are Earth-based. So, these are not insignificant endeavors, and of course, then large-scale habitats on the moon, Mars, and in free space. I know that Elon Musk said he's going to take us to Mars and do it all under his own capability, and maybe those who want to invest with him. But I think that the challenge here is a little bit larger and a little bit longer term. So these are the things that we're looking to finance. So when we begin to look at how we finance things, that we can see what the capabilities are in terms of how these kinds of activities can be financed. Of course, direct funding from the government has been done in the past, right? So that's where funding can come from. And obviously, we have some examples here of Lewis and Clark expedition, certainly the polar research, the Apollo program, the space station initiative, and the James Webb Space Telescope, and of course the Artemis program. These are very, especially when you talk about Artemis, and these are very expensive initiatives that that government is paying for. And it has to do with national security. That kind of there will be additional financial resources certainly would become available, but this model essentially is not sustainable for developing a true economy, which is really what we're striving for in Lunar. So where does the private sector come in? And these are just mechanisms whereby capital can flow into private investments, and most private companies, startups, and so forth are utilizing these mechanisms: debt capital, equity capital, private equity, venture capital, certainly direct donations of people who just feel like, gosh, this is a great cause, and they're not looking for a return on that investment. So, and most recently, a few years ago, we saw a lot of excitement around SPACs, or special purpose acquisition companies. My good friend Hoyt Davidson, I remember at the time specifically saying, well, maybe we don't need to worry about the commercial space anymore, because these SPACs are going to be a great way to generate capital. And most of us anyone who's been following this knows that the story is anything but, and the SPACs have not quite achieved the kind of levels that we want, and have become less of a favorable mechanism for raising capital. So we continue to work in this area. The strongest point is the strongest way is some sort of a partnership between public and private entities, right? So I spoke about how NASA is working with private companies. They're putting in some money. The COTS program was hugely successful, and that enabled us to see the Falcon 9 emerge from that, and the government paid a fraction of what that capability is. So, however, how do we take kind of what we've started and get a little more sophisticated about that? And so I want to look historically now at other kinds of public-private partnerships, and I'm using this term very generically, so in case folks are saying, well, wait a minute, when we say PPP, we mean something specific. I'm using it very generically, where the government is stepping in to help to stimulate certain economic developments in certain areas. So we like to talk about the Transcontinental Railroad, where the government was very much directly involved in issuing bonds to enable the Transcontinental Railroad to take place. This is always a great example, because in many parts of the United States where the railroad went through, people said there was nothing there. Of course, there was a lot of things there. There was there was nothing there. But what the investors understood was that there was that there was potential for the settlement. And so once you had the railroad there, then you were able to, the settlements and cities and towns were able to spring up all along the routes of the railroads as they developed and ultimately crisscrossed the United States. The Tennessee Value Authority is another great example how the government helped to set up the Tennessee Valley Authority to electrify rural Tennessee. And rural electrification around the United States was very big in the early part of the 20th century. This kind of direct government involvement helped to really stimulate this. And of course, the Tennessee Valley Authority is still going strong. It doesn't require any, it's self-sustaining and continues to provide a very valuable service to the community. Other things like a little more interesting, and this goes international with the U.S. International Development Bank. This is something Hoyt Davidson has sort of looked at and said, well, this bank helps to directly invest in companies, U.S. companies internationally. Could we change and modify this program such that it could be focused on private space investment? So he has an excellent paper on Outer Space Private Investment Authority, and this could be a means by which we could leverage an authorized bank to pump money into and to fund large scale programs. And then there's something called a little known authority of the U.S. Trade Representative is to Fast Track Trade Promotion Authority. And this allows the USTR to work to negotiate deals across bilateral, multilateral, across countries to stimulate particular specific sectors. And it's a very useful tool when we're trying to engage with countries to develop resources, whether it's energy or mining or agriculture. And so it's been a very useful tool. And there is potential here if we had what we would call the space trade agreement. This is actually an idea that has been developed by Robert Brumley, who has a bit of history at the Department of Commerce, has been hugely instrumental in helping to shape commercial space early on. And I see, I'm not sure how much time, could I get a time check? I know I started late.
I'd say we probably could go about another 10 minutes, perhaps.
Okay, I'll try to wrap up, and let me not drill too deep. Inmarsat, this was a government initiative to set up Inmarsat. That's now an independent organization. I love this idea of the CHIPS Act, which this is I forget the exact dollar amount, but the CHIPS Act is investing tens of billions of dollars into improving the U.S. chip market. Right, we just heard about that big news recently. And this is where the government is saying that chips, semiconductors is a strategically important capability for the U.S. to have, right? So we could similarly say that our ability to develop the commercial space is a strategically important dimension of the strength of the U.S. economy, and therefore would warrant the kind of significant direct investment. So, just something that we're thinking about. Other government incentives, and these are applied in various ways: loan debt guarantees, low interest loans. Tax incentives, potentially a zero tax for zero G as a common recommendation. Certainly cash subsidies and flow through shares. This is in Canada. I won't explain that, but it's in the report. I want to I'm going to post the report, by the way, for folks. I'm sorry, I meant to do that at the top. But let me walk through a couple of models that we've been looking at. So we're looking at this idea of a dedicated neobank to support the economic development of space. So this is the idea that we actually create a bank, and its focus is on raising money and investing in space projects. So the idea is if you're a believer in space, you now have a bank that you could put your money into. It's FDA, let me see, I think, yeah, it's FDIC insured. It can then, the bank will then over time invest their capital into space ventures. And thereby you can help to grow the space economy. And there are upsides and downsides to all of this, and we can get into that conversation. A space commodities exchange. This is, can we commodify certain things in space? You could, certainly right now you potentially could do launch. Over time, you could look at the acquisition of, say, volatiles in space as being a commodity and so forth. And then this exchange could expand over time. And again, it's another way of putting capital into the markets so that that capital could then be used for further development. I do like Tim Crispin's plan for creating a space public-private advanced commercial enterprise, or SPAC, and this is whereby you have a quasi-governmental agency or an independent corporation, if you will, that is established by an act of Congress that oversees all of the development of commercial and human development, the commercial development of space, and helps to utilize many of the mechanisms that I've already talked about in various ways to help us to drive that forward. I think there's a lot of positive to be said about that. There's an interesting proposal for a lunar cooperative, and this is now looking at more narrowly looking at the lunar surface as if we can look at the lunar surface as a community, you can create a lunar cooperative almost like a port authority, right? That would be able to provide the tenants with basic and fundamental resources and things that they need, like power and access to water and to food and certain basic things that this cooperative could then supply. And then, of course, people who wanted entities that wanted to participate then would become partners in that, would pay certain fees for certain services and so forth. It's got a lot of promise. It would take a lot of upfront investment, and I think that's where government can play a big role in an idea like this. If we pull it back a little bit, I also like the ULA, United Launch Alliance, and Tori Bruno has been promoting this for a few years now, the Strategic Propellant Reserve, and they're basically saying that if the United States could create a propellant reserve in orbit, and this picture here is what this propellant depot could look like, and the scheme here is essentially that the U.S. could create this depot and then guarantee that anybody who can bring propellant to this facility, that we would guarantee to pay them for that propellant. And they're surmising that a $15 to $26 billion investment can help to achieve this $1 trillion economy by 2050. So, just to conclude, there are a range of ways that we can approach financing, right? If you've gotten anything from this conversation, it is that we have not decided on a particular track as such. I'm going to stop sharing now. And we did not decided that on a particular track. We are continuing this effort. We have a working group that's starting, and we're going to kind of going back to square one to continue this conversation. In the end, we may come up with a specific recommendation on how to move forward. But this conversation needs to be ongoing. So I think with that, I'll conclude.
No, this has been really good and really helpful, Steve. Thank you so much. We have a few more minutes, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions that are coming in, and then we're going to move on to our next part of Conversations for the Future today. Steve, a question coming in a country so polarized where our space strategy gets reset every 2 to 4 years due to partisan struggles. What can we do to provide community to the space strategy in America? Without such continuity, how can we give the market any faith in the stability of space as an industry? And can we dislodge the private space industry from the legacy government structures which have traditionally slowed it down?
Yeah, I think that's a question in the form of like, this is what we have to do, right? So we do need to have a government and a population that is more invested or understands the potential of space and what it means to the future of our country and the future of the strength of our economy. And the second half of that is moving the private sector away from the government requiring of as you say legacy companies. The challenge here is that there's that government is really so important in this transition period. That's the challenge here. As much as we would like to say that the private sector can lead this, in many ways they are leading it. There's a role the government plays in terms of certainly in terms of funding, but also in terms of the regulatory parameters, establishing the rules of the road, because it's the government that's going to essentially or ultimately create that sense of security, that there's we'll be able to that people will be comfortable, especially when it comes to human spaceflight, right? That's very important, that people feel safe, they feel secure, that there's reliability, that they know what they're getting into. So government is going to continue to play I think we'll always have a role in this, and I think it's a little naive to think that that the private sector on its own was going to be able to open space. It's important though to strike that balance, and we do want a situation where government investment in space ultimately becomes a very small fraction of the overall space economy, right? So we see that now in the commercial satellite, in the communication satellite industry, right? So there's a massive commercial aspect of the communication satellite, and we kind of need to get there when it comes to other types of, certainly the cislunar economy and so forth. So, and I think the government is understanding that, especially the U.S. government. It's been very positive to see that with the new administration. It's a very pro-commercial orientation. It's sort of one of the positive holdovers or things that have transitioned nicely from the previous administration. So, I think there's a lot of room to continue to work that way. And I think globally, we're also seeing that recognition as well. So.
Well, thank you so much. That was great. Steve Wolfe joining us. If you are still thinking of your questions, don't worry, just put them in the chat, or Steve, if you can leave your information in the chat so anybody can reach out to you, social media, LinkedIn, email. As always, the best part about the conversations we have today is continuing the conversations moving forward, especially sometimes if you might have that one question you want more of a one-on-one interaction with. So Steve Wolfe, Beyond It, thank you so much for joining us today here on Foundation for the Future.
Thank you.